Hi, Lee.
Hi, Jason.
How are you?
I'm fine. It's a little warm here, but
In
otherwise,
beautiful Manayunk, Pennsylvania.
yeah, it's
What
pretty
is the
good.
date today? It
It's
is.
the 30th of April,
Yeah.
2024.
Yeah.
How are you?
I'm well.
I'm excited to talk to you about this incredible passion project you've been working on for the past couple of years.
Yeah.
Um, I think, it's just something I know very little about, but I can't wait to hear. Maybe I'll ask you some questions.
That would be nice. So, Lee, yeah, I would really like to thank you very much, really, for being here and being my sounding board, my interviewer, and
My pleasure.
the point that and the point of the biggest reason for you to be here, though, is that I'm going to explain a lot of things, and some things may come across as hard to believe, or maybe I don't explain them very well.
Mhm.
So if I say something and you need further clarification, by all means, say, yeah, hold on a second, I'm going to need to hear
I'll go
more about that. Yeah, time out,
Yeah.
explain more. I've got all of my sources here, so if you need to see something in writing, just say pause. Let me see that. I've got to see that.
Great. I brought my readers.
Great.
Okay.
Um, Oh, and then the other thing I wanted to clarify right off the bat is that, even though I'm paying for this interview,
Mhm.
is that I don't assign any kind of a copyright to it. I'm going to upload this to YouTube, and I'm turning it over to the public domain. People can download it, repost it on their platforms. They can do whatever, chop it up for sound bites.
Sure.
Anyhow, all of this is for public use.
Mhm.
I'm going to upload it to YouTube. And if people want to download it, repost it on their platform, I assign no copyright to this whatsoever.
Okay, good to know.
Great.
Great.
So, the
Tell me how this all started.
well, it all started because what this is all about is I'm here to explain to you how the IRS has deliberately violated a Supreme Court ruling. And I'll tell you right now, the Supreme Court ruling had to do with the Scientology group.
Mhm.
Okay, so and the thing is that when you say that word, people automatically get kind of like a vacant look in their eyes because they think it's just sort of like this strange group and not worthy of paying attention to. But yeah, the Supreme Court ruling was about the Scientology group, and the IRS has taken that Supreme Court ruling and is completely ignoring it. And they're violating the Constitution. The IRS is. They're violating the law. And I've discovered this,
Mhm.
and I've researched it, and I'm here to try to expose this crime. That's what this is all about.
Mhm.
It's exposing a crime. So that's the preface to it. Where it all started.
Wait, I want to say something
Go
though.
ahead.
I get no vacant look when you say the word Scientology. I'm fascinated. I
Yeah.
think there's been a lot of information that has, moved into the public realm that is stunning and interesting. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I think this is very contemporary in terms of a topic. And I can't believe you're telling me that the IRS has the ability to violate the Supreme Court. Is
Well,
that even possible?
it's physically possible.
Uh-huh.
It's certainly not legal, and the IRS has been getting away with this since, depending on what you could say, they've been getting away with it since June 5th, 1989, which is when the Supreme Court ruling came down. It's entitled Hernandez v. Commissioner.
Hmm.
The Supreme Court ruling is. You could say they've been getting away with it since October 1st, 1993,
Hmm.
when the IRS granted Scientology tax exemption.
Hmm.
So yeah, they've been getting away with it, and that's what this is all about. It's to stop it. It's to stop it, and to show that the Scientology group is dangerous, which everybody knows. But what they don't know is, like, for instance, and this is one of the things that'll come up during the conversation. But I found a lawsuit called Church of Scientology of California v. Commissioner
Hmm.
from 1984. And on page 10 of 54 of that lawsuit, there's a memo that the IRS wrote where they said or they wrote that Scientology is, that they engage in false imprisonment, mental abuse, forced dissolution of family ties. They talk about the Scientology has something called the disconnection policy.
Yeah.
You and I watched Alex Gibney's documentary
Hmm.
Going Clear
Hmm.
last night in preparation for this interview.
Stunning.
Yeah, so they talk a lot about
Horrible.
the disconnection policy in
Mhm.
in this documentary, And one of the things that's going to come up in this conversation, or maybe it already has, is that the IRS knew that this group was dangerous.
Mhm.
And but anyway, where it all started for me, I think that was your original question before I jumped off. And anyway,
Yeah.
is I watched this documentary, Going Clear. I found it fascinating. I find all sorts of like little niche topics to be fascinating. I found this one to be fascinating. So it's this documentary. It's by Alex Gibney. It came out in 2015. Some would say that Alex Gibney is one of the better documentarians out there right now,
Mhm.
if not, well, anyway, I'll just say one of the better ones.
Mhm.
Um, I found it fascinating. This documentary is based off of Lawrence Wright's book by the same title, Going Clear.
Mhm.
That book was published in 2013. I watched them both, and I really got interested in this topic of Scientology.
Mm.
I became a fan of the intrigue and the history of this group.
Mm.
So what happened was I watched the documentary again. That it came out in 2015. I think I watched the documentary probably sometime in 2018, 2019, or maybe from 2018 to 2019. I was watching it, and I was looking at material online, and I was looking at podcasts that people were doing, and I felt like I had a good handle on everything. And what's explained in this documentary well, on October 1st. Well, no, I'm going to stick with my original thought. Anyway, so I thought I had a good handle on this whole thing, and I kind of put the topic of Scientology away. What's up?
I'm sorry to stop you. I'm just curious how you went from being sort of, interested in Scientology and watching, these very, it's a really good documentary. It's fascinating, really. Anything about Scientology is fascinating to me. But what made you then get into this whole
Yeah,
tax IRS?
yeah.
Why is that important? Why is that an important way to look at the whole Scientology topic?
Well, all right. What it is that there's this going narrative, and you'll find this narrative in Alex Gibney's documentary. You'll find the narrative in Lawrence Wright's book. You'll find it in Mike Rinder's book. Mike Rinder is a very strong anti-Scientology activist. He used to be in Scientology
Mm.
for many, many years.
May I
He
see
was,
that?
yeah,
Yeah.
he was basically born into Scientology. His birth date, I think, is April 10th, 1955. His parents joined when he was very young. Um, and he was basically the number 3 man in Scientology up until 2007,
Hmm.
when he realized that the whole thing was dangerous, and that he had lost his life to it, and that it was a sham. And so in 2007, when Mike Rinder he was in London, England, at the Leicester Square station, when he had the epiphany,
Mm.
2007, that Scientology was all a bunch of nonsense, and it was detrimental, and he just bolted. He just left. He just called some people that he knew that had been in Scientology, who had left themselves, and he said, "I need a place to stay."
Mhm.
And they said, "Fly." I think he ended up going to Orlando, Florida, and couch surf for a while, and then he got his life back up and running.
How
Um,
old was he?
well, he was born April 10th, 1955, and he left in 2007. So I don't know. Do the math. He
I
was in
can't.
his 50s, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yes.
so anyway, there's a narrative in this book that Scientology filed 2,400 lawsuits against the IRS, and harassed the IRS into granting Scientology tax exemption.
Mm.
I feel like I'm jumping around here. So anyway, the narrative can also be found, just real quick, in Janet Reitman's book, and this is what I call the mainstream literature. Some other people's they've talked about this narrative, and the narrative goes like this: in the mid '80s, Scientology was in desperate need of getting religious tax exemption, and the reason for this is that in 1967, the IRS had revoked Scientology's tax exemption. They had it, and then it was taken away, because the IRS said Scientology was violating the enormment clause of the 501(c)(3). Do you know what a enormment is? All
No.
right.
No.
Basically, let's say you're the head of a charity, right? And money is donated to that charity.
Mhm.
You're obligated to spend that money on the stated good works of the charity. What you're not allowed to do is take that donated money and spend it on yourself,
Mm.
buying yourself houses, cars, clothes, okay? And if you do take donated money that's donated for charity and use it for yourself, that's called enormment. And that's what the founder of Scientology was doing, a man named L. Ron Hubbard. Lafayette
We all
Ronald
know
Hubbard.
L. Ron, yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm,
LRH.
mhm,
So he was taking donated money and spending it on himself.
mhm,
So in 1967, the IRS said, "Okay, you don't deserve tax exemption; it's revoked."
mhm,
Well, the founder, L. Ron Hubbard, disagreed with the IRS,
mhm,
and he said, "No, we deserve tax exemption," and he refused to pay taxes. Okay, and every single year there were lawsuits that Scientology filed. They lost them. They filed continuances and all that legal jazz, and they kept not paying taxes, not paying taxes, and the IRS kept fighting, saying you have to pay taxes. Um, then in 1986, L. Ron Hubbard died,
mhm,
and the person that took over the church was a man named David Miscavige, who was a young man. He was in his mid-20s when he took over. And when he took over, David Miscavige had a real problem because by that point, Scientology had amassed a $1 billion tax bill. And Scientology only had about $250 million worth of value. So they
mhm,
couldn't afford to pay the tax bill.
mhm,
All right. So if the IRS enforced the tax bill on Scientology, it was over. They were going defunct. So, what David Miscavige and the Church of Scientology did, and in the mid to late 80s, they had about 100,000 members worldwide, um, is they started suing the IRS. Okay, and this really did happen. They filed 2,400 lawsuits against the IRS. They filed lawsuits against individual IRS personnel, and all of that happened. Now, what also happened is in October of 1991, David Miscavige and his top lieutenant, a man named Marty Rathbun, walked into the IRS headquarters building and said, "We want to speak with the commissioner," a man named Fred Goldberg at the time. And unbelievably, they actually did get the meeting with
mhm,
Fred Goldberg. They had an impromptu meeting with the commissioner, the head of a U.S. government agency. Okay, and and at this meeting, a deal was struck that if the IRS gave Scientology tax exemption, all of the lawsuits would be dropped. But here's what everyone's getting wrong.
mhm.
It wasn't the 2,400 lawsuit war that motivated Fred Goldberg and the IRS. It was only two. There were only two lawsuits that the IRS really cared about.
Mhm.
But what happened is that Scientology, and in particular David Miscavige, lied. And they didn't want the truth to be known, which I'm going to explain to you here in a minute. What were those two lawsuits? Why did the IRS only care about those two? I'm going to get into
That
that.
was my question,
Yeah,
but yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to get into that.
Mhm,
But what happened is that David Miscavige and Scientology lied,
mhm,
and they told all of these Scientologists that what motivated the IRS was the 2,400 lawsuits, that Scientology had harassed the IRS into submission and forced the IRS to grant them tax exemption. Now, let me say this again in no uncertain terms. This narrative that Scientology harassed the IRS into compliance is preposterous. All right, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to ask the audience to think about this for a minute.
mhm.
Just take a moment. Do you really think that that it's possible to cower a US government agency?
Well, that's why I asked you earlier, who's got the firepower here and what is it?
What do you mean firepower?
Meaning who can win? So if, I was just in from where I sit, it sounded like there was lots of lawsuits
Hmm.
that the Church of Scientology was pestering the heck out of the IRS,
Hmm.
and this Church of Scientology could do so because they've got such deep pockets and they could have all these lawyers and they lawyered up and they went bananas with it.
Hmm.
And the IRS was just like, I can't deal with this anymore.
Right.
We got to cut a deal.
Okay.
So it sounded like the Church of Scientology had the firepower to win these arguments, but you're telling me something different.
Yeah, that's the narrative that Scientology overwhelmed the IRS
Right.
with 2,400 lawsuits.
Right.
Okay, and look, let me give you another example. Imagine for a moment, some wealthy billionaire is
Mhm.
being investigated by the FBI
Mhm.
for criminal activity, and there's real evidence that the
Mhm.
billionaire committed some sort of severe federal crime.
Yes. then I would think that,
Yeah. And then billionaire decided to sue the FBI relentlessly. And eventually the FBI said, okay, we give up.
yeah,
Never mind. We've learned our lesson. We're going to go back to Quantico. And from now on, we're only going to investigate poor people.
yeah.
If I told you that happened, would you believe me?
No, I would be in a state of disbelief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So look, to suggest that anyone, including very much the Church of Scientology, can beat up the IRS is preposterous.
Mm.
And I'm not the only person that believes this. Okay. Let me just say this. I found a legal article that was written by a man named Kent Royalty
Mm-hmm.
and a lady named Diana Ross. Yeah, that's really her name.
Mm-hmm.
She, both of them actually are professors at St. Mary's College in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
At least they were. I believe Kent Royalty still is. But in 2005, they wrote a legal article, which I have, and I can show it to you.
Mm-hmm.
And they figured it out. They were about 80%. The material that was in their article is about 80% of the salient information. But if you read it, you'll get it. You'll understand what really motivated the IRS. And it all goes back to the Hernandez v. Commissioner ruling, okay, which we're going to get into big time. But that's what did it. It was Hernandez. That's what scared the IRS into granting Scientology tax exemption.
May I ask one question?
Sure.
You said there was 2,700,
2,400.
2,400 cases that were brought forth, but it was only 2 that actually were the deciding factors.
Correct.
So where is that? I mean, I'm just curious, where do you find that information? How do you know that it was down to just 2? What's the source?
Well, we're going to get into that.
Okay.
But dates. It all has to do with dates.
Okay.
All right. And so now let me explain to you. Now I've explained to you what everyone believes, and I'm going on record as saying everyone's wrong. I've said it. I've said Alex Gibney's wrong, Lawrence Wright's wrong, Janet Reitman's wrong. I'm just going to go down the line here. Mike Rinder's wrong. Leah Remini is wrong. Joe Rogan is wrong. Jake Tapper from CNN has floated this inaccurate narrative that Scientology harassed the IRS into compliance. So they're all wrong. Okay, I'm laying down the gauntlet. I'm looking at
Boom, there it is.
Yeah, the entire audience, all of the experts in this topic, and I'm looking at them. And I'm saying, I'm sorry, but you're all wrong. Okay, so here's what happened. Here's what really did do it, and how did Scientology get its tax exemption? Here it is. So like I said, that 2,400 lawsuit war was going on. One of the lawsuits, called Hernandez v. Commissioner, made it all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. And on June 5th, 1989, the United States Supreme Court, in a 5-2 decision, ruled in favor of the IRS, right? Because it's Hernandez v. Commissioner of the IRS. They ruled in favor of the IRS. So, and what the ruling was, is that quid pro quo payments to Scientology are not tax deductible. Okay. And let me explain what had happened. Hernandez was a Scientologist, and in Scientology, you do these things called courses and auditing. Just think of it like this: courses are these books that you purchase that L. Ron Hubbard wrote, and they're part of the religious doctrine of Scientology. And you read the books, you study the books, and you start progressing up what they call the bridge to total freedom.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there's several levels.
8.
No.
Oh, more than 8?
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
See, there's several levels, and I don't even know how many. And then you get to the state of clear. And then from clear, then you go from, there's operating Thetan or OT1 all the way up to OT8. That's as far as Hubbard ever got before he passed away in 1986. So you pay. So if you're a Scientologist, you pay for the books and you study them. And so those are called courses. And auditing, I'll just simply say, is a type of spiritual counseling where it's if
there's a device,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
And they hold these cans,
yeah, energy,
and it's basically like 1/3 of a lie detector test,
right? Body temperature, probably.
But Scientologists believe that it measures the mass of your thoughts, and even though and this is coming right from Lawrence Wright, said this in Alex Gibney's documentary, there's no evidence that thoughts have mass. But anyway, so you pay for courses and you pay for auditing, okay? And what Hernandez tried to do is deduct these payments from his taxes. Well, the IRS turned him down and said, no, those are quid pro quo payments. You're giving money and getting something in exchange, so you can't deduct it from your taxes. Hernandez was saying, oh, no. Those are charitable donations. So he filed a lawsuit, and the lawsuit went all the way up to the Supreme Court. Okay. And the Supreme Court ruled in the IRS's favor, and
Mhm.
they ruled that quid pro quo transactions with religions are not tax deductible. And remember, I said it's a 5-2 decision. Remember that,
Mm,
please.
I'll try.
So, so the IRS won at the Supreme Court. Great, right? Yeah, except it wasn't. The Hernandez ruling was a disaster for the IRS. Why?
Why?
Because you see, the IRS allows the quid pro quo transactions of other religions to be deducted. Which are the two biggest out there? The first I'll say is the LDS Mormon religion.
Mhm.
Okay, they have mandatory tithing.
Yes.
And in that religion, you must pay 10% of your income to the church. And if you don't, they will close the doors on you.
Mhm.
Don't pay, can't come in.
Mhm.
What is that? That's a quid pro quo transaction. That is not a donation, it is a mandatory payment. And the IRS allows LDS Mormon tithing to be deducted. The other major religion is Judaism. Now, most, not all, but most synagogues have what are called temple dues. I would say about 95% of them have mandatory temple dues. You
Mm.
must pay.
Mm.
And if you don't pay your temple dues, then you can't get into the temple. Once again, the IRS allows Jewish temple dues to be deducted. But per the Hernandez ruling, they're not lawfully tax deductible. And to this day, the IRS is allowing LDS Mormon tithing and Jewish temple dues to be deducted. And this is what I mean when I say that the IRS has taken a Supreme Court ruling, Hernandez v. Commissioner, and chucked it out the window.
Mhm.
They are ignoring it.
Mhm.
Okay. And that's one of the things that's really has me energized and why I've been dedicated to this for so long. Because one of our government agencies, right? And there's the elected government, you have obviously the presidency, the legislature, and the Supreme Court. Beneath them, you have the departments, right? Department of Defense, Department of State, but you have the Department of Treasury. Below the Department of Treasury, or below the departments, are the agencies. And the IRS is an agency of the Department of Treasury, okay?
Yeah.
And one of our government agencies has circumvented the authority of our elected federal government. And that is just egregious and unacceptable to me, and it
Mhm.
really does energize me.
Mhm.
Um,
Right on.
yeah. Well, obviously our tax laws are laws, so they're voted on by our elected legislators. So by ignoring and not enforcing our tax laws properly, the IRS is circumventing the authority of Congress.
Mhm.
Obviously, the president signs laws, so they're circumventing the authority of the presidency.
Mhm.
But worst of all, and most egregiously, the IRS has circumvented, if not just disregarded, the authority of the United States Supreme Court. And this is just all wrong and must
Mhm.
be stopped and
Mhm.
must be exposed. And people have gotten hurt,
Mhm.
which I'm going to get into.
Mm.
But the members of this Scientology group, which is a very vicious group, they've been hurt. They've been hurt. So that all, human suffering always goes to the top of the list. But
But I'm curious how they can ignore it.
because nobody's called them on it, because nobody knows.
How does nobody know?
Because they all believe this false narrative. They all believe that Scientology harassed the IRS into, oh, that's what it was. So I remember now. So what it was is I was explaining, so the Hernandez ruling was a disaster for the IRS, okay? Because the IRS allows LDS Mormon tithing to be deducted, that it allows Jewish temple dues to be deducted, and now there was a Supreme Court ruling saying that quid pro quo transactions with religions are not deductible. So if the IRS enforced or rather adhered to the Supreme Court ruling, which they're obligated to do,
Mhm.
they would have to tell the Mormons, sorry, but your tithing is not deductible. The Jewish people, your temple dues are not deductible, and yeah, right. Now, ask me, how is it that I know that Mormon tithing and Jewish temple dues are quid pro quo transactions?
So how do you know that that temple dues and tithing
Yeah.
in the Mormon Church are quid pro quo
Quid
deductible
pro quo transactions.
transactions. How do you know this?
I know this because if you remember, I said that the ruling was 5-2, and the two justices that dissented was Justice Sandra Day O'Connor and Justice Scalia joined her. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor wrote the dissenting opinion, and it's, if you read the Hernandez case, it's page 704 to page 713. It's 9 pages long. And in her dissent, Justice O'Connor, basically her dissent is really her warning to the court. Justice O'Connor was saying to the court and to everyone else, like, do you realize what you're doing with this ruling? This is going to drastically affect certain religions. And Justice O'Connor pointed at the LDS Mormon religion and their tithing, and she says, this is a quid pro quo exchange. This is now going to not be permissible. She, in her dissent, she talked about something called Jewish High Holy Day tickets. Now, if you look and if you go to synagogues' websites, most of them say that they have these high holy days that you pay tickets for, and you can deduct the cost from your taxes, which you're not supposed to be doing. It's a purchase, not a donation. But she, anyway, right. If you look at their websites, they will say that high holy day tickets are wrapped up in the temple dues. So pretty much they're interchangeable. She talks about high holy day tickets, but really Jewish temple dues are the same thing. She also talked about other religions, like for instance, the Catholic religion has something called mass stipends, where a Catholic person pays the church, pays the priest to say a special mass. And the IRS allows these to be deducted, mass stipends. She talked about something else called pew rents, where some religions allow parishioners to rent.
So what kind of chaos would this reign? What is her big warning? She's saying that suddenly all of these religious groups are going to become irate. They're going to
no.
It's going to create.
That's not what she was warning about. What she was warning was this ruling does not just affect Scientology.
Right.
It affects all these other religions. Like you do, she was saying to the court and to the general public, and whoever reads Supreme Court dissents, she was saying to anybody, she's like, you realize that this is going to affect other religions. It's not just Scientology that's at stake here. That was kind of her warning. Like, this affects other religions. Okay.
The worry being what? That suddenly these religions wouldn't be able to fund their religions?
Well,
what's the worry here?
No. Again, her warning was that the court wasn't just ruling on Scientology. Her warning was this is going to have knock-on effects. Like, you do understand the greater implication of what you're doing with this ruling. So that was her warning, is that this is going to have knock-on effects. It's not just Scientology that's at issue here. That was really her warning. Okay, and we're going to talk about those knock-on effects because that's what Scientology took advantage of in the two lawsuits. All right. So anyway, so if you're going to read the Hernandez ruling, the very first place to start is Justice Sandra Day O'Connor's dissent, page 704 to page 713 of the document. Yep, and then read the rest of it. And you'll see this issue of quid pro quo transactions. So anyhow, June 5th, 1989, the Hernandez ruling comes down. And remember, Scientology is in a fight for its life. It must get that exemption, otherwise it's going kaput. Scientology realizes that the Hernandez ruling is a disaster for the IRS, okay, because they're saying no to Scientology's quid pro quo transactions, but they are saying yes to all these other religions, and they realize that the Supreme Court had just put its foot down and said quid pro quo transactions with religions not tax deductible, and the IRS was allowing it, those other religions. So what does Scientology do? It files two lawsuits arguing, and let me back up. Going back to Justice Sandra Day O'Connor's dissent, she called this whole thing administrative inconsistency. No to Scientology's quid pro quo deductions, but yes to everybody else's. She called that administrative inconsistency. Okay. So in 1989, Scientology, well, rather, it was about 6 Scientologists grouped together, and they filed a lawsuit against the IRS, and it's called Garrison v. Commissioner. And it was filed in 1989. And it argues, guess what?
Why us?
Administrative inconsistency.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you, which I have obviously, read the Garrison case,
Yeah.
and you look at the verbiage in the Garrison case, they basically copied what Justice Sandra Day O'Connor wrote in her dissent. I mean, the verbiage, the wording is almost the same.
Mm.
But you see, they sued the IRS over administrative inconsistency. Now, Scientology is this quixotic group at best and completely has some very harebrained ideas and a very, how should I put this, unconventional view of the world.
I should say.
Yeah. I don't want to, I'm not here to make fun of anyone's religion. I'm not anti-religion, believe what you want, freedom of religion. And maybe I should clarify that. Look,
Mhm.
I've brought up a lot of religions now: LDS Mormon, Judaism, Catholicism, Protestant religions. Look, I am not anti-religion at all. Okay, I believe in the First Amendment. I believe in freedom of speech and freedom of the religion. I believe in freedom of religion. I believe that that's one of the pillars of why we can genuinely call ourselves a free country.
Hurrah.
Yeah. No, what this is all about for me is the Constitution, the law, the integrity of our government, but most importantly of all, the fact that people have gotten hurt
Mhm.
and they've been lied to and they don't understand what happened to them.
Mhm.
And one of our government agencies enabled a dangerous organization to continue abusing people. That's what this is about for me.
So, layman here,
Yeah.
make that connection with more words. How the IRS enabled by, by this ruling, enabled Scientology to continue and hurt people. Just wrap that up a little more.
Well, let me
for
get
me.
through the story about the two lawsuits and administrative inconsistency.
Okay.
So all right. So they file in 1989. They file the Garrison case, right? And this time around, despite as quixotic as Scientology is, this time they actually had a point. The IRS was violating administrative inconsistency. No to you, but yes to these, right?
Mhm.
And so the Garrison case was proceeding through the courts. Now, there was another Scientology case that I found that argues administrative inconsistency. It was filed in 1990. It's called Powell v. U.S. Powell v. the United States. Powell v. U.S. And and by the way, I probably should have said this at the beginning. All of my sources are on my website, jasonpolychron.com. But anyhow, Powell v. U.S. They filed that lawsuit arguing administrative inconsistency. Okay,
Mhm.
these two lawsuits started churning through the legal system. You were saying, how do I know that it was these two lawsuits and not the 2,400? All right, I know because you gotta pay very close attention to dates in this situation. Okay, and here's what happened. Just bear with me.
Mhm.
On October 8th, 1993, Scientology announced to its people that it had gained tax exemption. And it's in the documentary Going Clear. There's footage of it. They're in the LA Sports Arena in Los Angeles. There were about 10,000. Okay, this was October 8th, 1993.
With that super 90s stage set.
Yeah, with the
Like the
1990s.
throne and the big
Yeah, all that.
sconces and gold. And it was really ugly, but go ahead.
So in that speech, the head of Scientology, David Miscavige, makes this really, really long speech about how they've been fighting the IRS and blah, blah, blah. But in that speech, I believe David Miscavige made a terrible mistake. He tipped his hand as to what really motivated the IRS. In the speech, David Miscavige talks about the impromptu meeting with Fred Goldberg in October of 1991. And David Miscavige said that he was in Washington, D.C. to go to a hearing in one of the 2,400 lawsuits.
Mhm.
Now, Scientology's headquarters is in Clearwater, Florida. They had 2,400 lawsuits going in 1991 against the IRS, right?
Yeah.
And yet, David Miscavige, the head of Scientology, goes to Washington, D.C. for a hearing in one of those lawsuits.
Mhm.
What does that tell you about that one lawsuit?
You can find it if you do your research.
Why would David Miscavige go from Clearwater, Florida to Washington, D.C. for a hearing in one of the 2,400 lawsuits?
I don't know because if they win it, it's the best one.
Well,
Get the most money. I don't know.
basically, it's because that one lawsuit had to have been very important to David Miscavige.
Right. That's
Right.
the one that gets them
Right.
back their tax exempt
Well,
status.
Right. Well, no. No. So David Miscavige admitted that he was in Washington, D.C. in October of 91 for a hearing in one lawsuit. Now, Garrison v. Commissioner, where was that lawsuit being adjudicated? Washington, D.C. So I actually went to the U.S. tax court, and long story short, there was a very nice lady there. I won't say her name, but she was the head of public affairs at the time. And she helped, I'll just leave it at that. She helped me find the Garrison v. Commissioner. She gave me a tip where I could find it online, and it
Mhm.
worked out. Anyway, I found Garrison v. Commissioner.
Mhm.
But not only that, I found the docket for the case. And a docket's like a scorecard.
Mhm.
All right. And if you remember, there were several people that grouped together in Garrison. So it was called, but there were like 6 Scientologists that grouped together in Garrison.
Mhm.
And so there were actually about 6 dockets, and I got all 6 of them, and they're on my website. And if you look at the dockets, there was activity in the Garrison case in October of 1991.
Interesting.
All right. Miscavige, was in Washington in October of 91. There was activity in the Garrison case in October of 91. Miscavige and Marty Rathbun walked into the IRS headquarters building in October of 1991. We know that because in his speech, David Miscavige said, yeah, it was October of 91 that we went into the IRS headquarters building. Also, in the closing agreement between Scientology and the IRS, which leaked online, the IRS admitted that the leader of Scientology met with the commissioner at the time, and they admitted that it took place in October of 1991. Now, there is an article by a man named Douglas France, last name Frantz. It was published in I think it was March 9th, 1997, in the New York Times. And in that article, Douglas France, he said that Miscavige and Goldberg had their meeting in late October 1991, and that is the closest I could get to when exactly did David Miscavige walk into that IRS headquarters building and say, I want to speak with the commissioner.
Mhm.
The closest I could get was October of 1991. Now, you remember I said that there were 2 lawsuits
Right.
where Scientology was arguing administrative inconsistency,
Mhm.
and the other lawsuit was Powell v. U.S., which was being heard in the 11th Circuit, which is Florida, Georgia, and I think Alabama. Anyway, that was the other lawsuit. There was a favorable ruling in the Powell case, the 22nd of October, 1991. Powell was on his way to proving the administrative inconsistency on the IRS
Mhm.
that Justice Sandra Day O'Connor had warned about. If Powell had won, what would have happened? The courts would have ordered the IRS to get into compliance with the Hernandez ruling. And Miscavige knew it.
Mhm.
This was how Scientology was going to corner the IRS. It's with the administrative inconsistency that Justice Sandra Day O'Connor warned about, and they were going to use the Powell case and the Garrison case to do it. And that's why David Miscavige walked into the IRS headquarters building in late October 1991, because the Powell verdict, or not the verdict, but a favorable ruling came down in the Powell case on the 22nd of October 1991.
So he had standing. He had something he could
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question.
Yes.
All of the other source material that you have does not say this. It says the common misinformation.
What, you mean this source material, the mainstream? I call it the mainstream literature.
Mainstream literature
Alex
says it's,
Gibney's documentary, Lawrence Wright's book, Janet Reitman's book. Yep.
that the Church of Scientology badgered.
Yeah.
And they badgered and they badgered and they badgered and they won.
Yes.
That's the story.
That's the narrative, and it's false.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, if you watch Alex Gibney's documentary, there is no mention of Hernandez v. Commissioner. Not here. Okay? No mention it. Lawrence Wright's book. Now, to be fair, Alex Gibney's documentary is basically an extension of Lawrence Wright's book.
Right.
Okay, this is okay. They're almost the same. And I have it. I mean, I can show you right now in the index if you want. If you look for Hernandez v. Commissioner, not here. They don't know, Lee. Mike Rinder, strangely enough, and see, here's another part about this. Now, let me clarify something. I respect Mike Rinder a lot. I've emailed him. I've sent him snail mail. I sent him a copy of my research. I didn't get through to him, unfortunately. I watched a lot of his podcasts. Mike Rinder is the key to all of this. He is the most prominent anti-Scientologist activist out there, but I can't get through to him, not yet. Hopefully this video will do it. But anyway, this is Mike Rinder's book, A Billion Years. In this book, Mike Rinder, though, talks about the Hernandez case. But you know what? He only calls it a Supreme Court ruling. He doesn't even call it Hernandez v. Commissioner. He doesn't call it by name, which leads me to believe that Mike Rinder, while he knows about the Hernandez case, he does not understand the gravity of that ruling. He doesn't realize the impact that it had, not just on Scientology, but on all of these other religions. So yeah, if you read his book, you're going to read that false narrative that they harassed the IRS into compliance. Same thing with Janet Reitman, Leah Remini, Jake Tapper.
Is it because that false narrative is just sensational? Is it because it positions the Church of Scientology as all powerful, even more powerful than our government? Is that why we like to tell the story that way? Because what would be so wrong with telling it the way you're telling it?
Well, I think that the reason why Scientology likes to tell that lie, that false narrative, is for two reasons. One, you're right; it gives them clout. You know, we're big bad Scientology. We beat up the IRS, so it gives them a feather in their cap, which is fraudulent. But the other reason why Scientology tells the lie is because they can't have people knowing the truth. They cannot have people knowing that what really happened is that in October of '91, David Miscavige said to Fred Goldberg, if you give us tax exemption, all of those lawsuits will go away. Every last one of them. And what Fred Goldberg what he heard was, yeah, fine, the 2,400 lawsuits, whatever. But you're going to get rid of that Garrison case and that Powell case. And Miscavige, that was the between the lines conversation that those two men were having. Go ahead.
Great. What would have happened if those cases had gone forward? What would it have meant for the IRS? Why was he so motivated to make Powell and Garrison go away? I understand it's about all the other religions, but what would have happened?
Well, what would have happened is that the Powell and Garrison would have won. The courts would have ordered the IRS to get in compliance with the Hernandez ruling. The IRS would have to call all of these religions and say, sorry, but your
chaos.
Yeah. Your
oh my God.
dues and your tithing and your mass stipends and everything else are no longer deductible. Sorry. That would have resulted in a whole trove of lawsuits. This is a First Amendment violation.
Right.
Angry phone calls to Washington. This could affect people getting elected into office. Because Mormonism, I think, that's a pretty. You don't meet Mormon people every day, but it's not like it's not like a blue moon that you meet Mormon people. The same thing with Jewish people, and people are motivated by their religious beliefs, so there would have been a lot of backlash. So yeah, what happened is that David Miscavige and Fred Goldberg basically made a deal, an underhanded deal, and it was criminal. And let me go back to what I was saying about how important it is to understand dates.
Mhm.
And you were saying to me, and you were asking me about how I know that it was these cases that motivate and did all of this. All
Mhm.
right. Another set of dates that you have to keep in mind is the Hernandez ruling was June 5th, 1989, right? When did Fred Goldberg become the commissioner of the IRS? July 5th, 1989, 1 month apart. Now, if you remember, I said that Scientology had its tax exemption revoked in 1967 for violating the enormous portion of the tax code. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and from 67, the IRS kept saying, you owe us taxes, you owe us taxes, you
Mhm.
don't qualify for exemption. And all of a sudden, the Hernandez ruling comes down, and Fred Goldberg takes over as the IRS commissioner, which means that Fred Goldberg there's a new variable in this Scientology equation, the Hernandez case. Okay. The IRS have been consistently saying no and winning in the courts from 67 up until 89. They just, no, you're a for-profit enterprise. You have a commercial nature. You don't deserve exemption. Okay. But all of a sudden the Hernandez ruling comes down. So now there's a new variable. All of a sudden the IRS's tune changes.
Mhm.
Now you can have exemption.
Mhm.
So, and Fred Goldberg had to deal with the Hernandez case, which no other previous commissioner of the IRS had to deal with, right? June 5th, 1989, Hernandez. July 5th, 1989, Goldberg takes over as commissioner of the IRS. Now, another date.
But that's a complete reversal in IRS policy.
Yeah.
So, of course, he had to deal with it. It was like a huge change. Suddenly, the Supreme Court was saying something different, and
Well, the Supreme
they were
Court.
going to have to enforce it.
Well, you see, and we're going to get into this further, but this issue of quid pro quo transactions with religions, this has dogged the
Yeah.
IRS basically since it was founded. And we're going to get into this because
Mm.
this actually goes back to the LDS Mormon Church.
Mm.
And it was Brigham Young who actually dealt with
Mhm.
this issue of quid pro quo transactions, going back to 18, what was it? Yeah, 1869.
Wow.
But
You're amazing. You're a savant.
yeah. Well, anyway, anyhow.
You know everything. Go on. Sorry.
Yeah. So I don't even know where I was.
Well, you were talking about how the Hernandez case was a big turning point for Goldberg. You know, he took office, suddenly he had to deal with this new ruling.
Yeah. Oh, that's what it was. Keeping up with dates. So the Goldberg Miscavige meeting took place late October 1991, and I bet every dollar in my wallet it was just after the 22nd of October 1991 when the Powell ruling came down. Which, by the way, that was the 22nd of October of 91 was a Tuesday, so I'd be willing to bet that it was a Wednesday or a Thursday that Miscavige walked into that
Yeah.
IRS building, knowing damn good and well that he now had leverage, right, over Goldberg and the IRS. But the other thing to keep in mind is Fred Goldberg left office the 2nd of February 1992. Right, so October of 91 is the meeting. Fred Goldberg was out of the IRS 4 months later, right? His tenure was coming to a rapid close. So what happened is that Fred.
Is that common? Like, did he serve?
Yeah, he served 3 years.
Okay.
Most when you're the director of an agency, it's usually about 3 years.
Okay.
So what happened is that David Miscavige and Fred Goldberg made an underhanded deal. You give us exemption, and all of our lawsuits will go away, especially those two that Miscavige knew the IRS cared about: Garrison v. Commissioner and Powell v. U.S. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So what happened next was, and as I was saying, this was October of 91. Fred Goldberg, his tenure at the IRS was over the 2nd of February 1992. So he had 4 months left, and then he was out of there. So Fred Goldberg set up a special committee to review Scientology's tax status. Okay. This committee comprised of, I think, of about 5 IRS officials, and I have their names. But I know that the man who headed the special committee, his name was Howard Schoenfeld,
Hmm.
and this committee lasted for 2 years. Now, another thing that's not in the mainstream literature is that the reason why the committee lasted for 2 years is because there's a law that says if the IRS audits a religion, that audit can only last for 2 years.
Mm.
There's an artificial cap on it.
Mm.
And I'll get into this if you want to hear about it more later. So the committee reviewed Scientology's tax exemption for 2 years. Now, here's another place where I very much disagree with the mainstream literature. The special committee that Fred Goldberg set up never had the authority to grant Scientology tax exemption. Okay. This was an ad hoc group of people that just happened to be meeting in a conference room and were meeting with Scientology officials. And Mike Rinder was one of them, by the way.
Mhm.
That's why Mike Rinder is so important. That's why I say
Mhm.
that he is the most critical person in this entire equation. If there is only one person I can get through to, I would hope it's Mike Rinder.
Mm.
But Mike Rinder met with that special committee back in between 91 and 93. And at the end of the 2 years, Howard Schoenfeld went to what's called the Exempt Organizations Technical Division. And they are the ones who have the authority to grant an organization exemption or not. There were 2 people at that tax exempt technical the Exempt Organizations Technical Division. One was named Donna Moore, and the other one was named Terrell Burkowski. Now, this is from the Douglas France article. Okay, Howard Schoenfeld told them to grant Scientology tax exemption and to ignore the commercial nature of Scientology and to give them exemption. Donna Moore and Terrell Burkowski wrote memos to the IRS stating that they were being told to do something that was not protocol in granting Scientology tax exemption. And then, as I understand Douglas France's article, it was those 2 people at the IRS that granted Scientology its exemption. Now, you want to talk about a major red flag? There it is. The 2 people who actually stamped Scientology tax exempt wrote memos saying we're being told to do something that's not protocol. That's not good. What do you call those memos? Those are, get out of jail free card, CYA memos, right?
Mm.
So that's what happened. And they were granted their exemption on October the 1st, 1993. By the way, the month of October is the beginning of the government's fiscal year. So when it comes to the government, that's why the month of October keeps coming up over and over again. It's very common for the government to make a decision, but then the decision is not enacted until October when the new money comes through, the budget comes through. So anyway, Terrell Burkowski, Donna Moore stamped Scientology tax exempt, and that was October the 1st, 1993. David Miscavige announces the exemption October the 8th, 1993 in Los Angeles, and that was it. The deal was struck. The crime was finalized. Scientology was given its exemption. The IRS said that all quid pro quo transactions for courses and for auditing with Scientology are tax deductible, despite the Supreme Court saying that they're not. So the IRS just tossed a Supreme Court ruling.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I find it very astonishing that, and I hope you can explain it to me, that the special committee headed up by Schoenfeld
Mm-hmm.
that did not have the power to enforce anything, right?
Nope.
That they did have the power then to tell Donna Moore and Terrell Burkowski.
Burkowski.
This is one of those odd names like we have. And why did Donna and Terrell obey the rule, do that? I mean, they had the power to execute. Why did they do it if they didn't believe that it was right? You said we're being told to do something we're not supposed. That isn't.
Well, I mean,
Why'd they do it? Did they get like a Mercedes Benz or something?
I don't think that that was the case. I think it was kind of I imagine Howard Schoenfeld was a senior person
Mm,
at the IRS,
mm,
and I'd imagine Donna Moore and Terrell Burkowski were significantly,
mm.
and I think it was one of those cases of, you got to remember, this is 1993 that we're talking about here. Okay,
Yeah.
this is pre-internet. This is pre like whistleblower protection laws didn't exist back then.
Mm.
This and this was the get along to get along, and if don't make waves. So I think they were told to do something by someone senior, and they just capitulated. But they knew something was funky,
Mm.
and I was in the Navy for 15 years, and I was stationed at a government in the government. I'll just say that. And yeah, that this would make sense that this is how you would do it. You don't want to make waves, but if your boss tells you to do something that isn't is off the line, and you want to believe, it's one of those things like, maybe my boss is right. Maybe that special committee understands things and knows things that I don't.
Hmm.
Maybe I can trust him,
Hmm.
but my gut's telling me something's not really right here. So I'll do it, but I'm going to get some documentation that I was told to do this. And I think that that's what happened.
Did you read that documentation? Is
What do
that
you mean?
is that in the documentation
You
where
mean the
they?
memo?
Yeah.
No, I did not read the memo. I only read there's a lawsuit called Tax Analyst v. Commissioner that was filed in 1995. And then that lawsuit is referenced by Douglas Francis's article. I should mention, Douglas Francis' article, his 1997 New York Times article, is 10 pages long,
Mm.
and he was a Pulitzer Prize finalist for this article. So it's a very comprehensive article. But I read about the memos in his article, and it's going to be listed on my website. It's one of my sources. So
Got it. Thank you.
yeah.
So then what happens? Smooth sailing for the Church of
No,
Scientology.
so let me just wrap up this whole entire timeline for you, kind of bring it home. So what happened was Scientology was desperate for tax exemption in the mid 80s. One of their lawsuits, Hernandez v. Commissioner, makes it all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled June 5th, 1989, that quid pro quo transactions with Scientology and therefore all other religions are not tax deductible. Justice Sandra Day O'Connor sees the knock-on effects. She writes her dissent. She warns everyone, like, you do realize the full gravity of this ruling, right?
Mhm.
So the ruling is made. Scientology realizes that the IRS has a problem on its hands. Not to call the Supreme Court ruling a problem, but yeah, there was this administrative inconsistency that Justice Sandra Day O'Connor warned about.
Mhm.
They were saying no to Scientology's quid pro quo deductions, but saying yes to everybody else's. That's a problem. And so this was the leverage that Scientology had. And they used that leverage in the Garrison v. Commissioner case that was filed in 1989. And they used that leverage in the Powell v. United States case that was filed 1990. And it worked.
Mhm.
They were on their way to proving the administrative inconsistency that Justice O'Connor warned about. They were on their way to proving that on the IRS. And that's what frightened the IRS. They did not want to have the Hernandez ruling proven on the IRS, because then the IRS would have to rescind the tax deductibility of LDS Mormon tithing, rescind the tax deductibility of Jewish temple dues, rescind the tax deductibility of Catholic mass stipends and Protestant pew rents, right?
And chaos would reign.
There would be a lot of anger. It would
Yeah.
anger a lot of people. There would be angry phone calls to Washington. There'd be lawsuits. Oh my God, this is a First Amendment violation, right?
Right.
It'd be a real problem.
Right.
And the IRS just didn't want to deal with this. They saw this massive problem coming down at them with these two lawsuits, and then the Hernandez case. And Miscavige and his lawyer, by the way, his lawyer, the top lawyer for Scientology, she's still there. It's a woman named Monique Yingling. Well, who was
Like the beer?
yeah, like the beer.
Cool.
Monique Yingling.
Is she one of the Yingling's daughters?
I don't know about that, but she is the top lawyer for Scientology and David Miscavige. And who was the lawyer? Who was the lawyer that headed up the Garrison case? Monique Yingling. So again, that's how important that Garrison case was to Scientology. So anyway, there's a favorable ruling in the Powell case, the 22nd of October, 1991. It was in the 11th Circuit. 22nd of October, 1991. David Miscavige admitted that he was in Washington, D.C. in October of 1991 in his Turning Point event speech that he gave on the 8th of October, 1993. He admitted that he was in Washington. And when the favorable ruling in the Powell case came down, that's when David Miscavige walked into the IRS headquarters building and said, I want to speak with the commissioner, and actually got the ruling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You'll read, if you read Lawrence Wright's book, this is another thing that I dispute. In his book, he says, he writes that David Miscavige got frustrated and went into the IRS headquarters building out of the blue one day. I completely dispute that. It is not. Miscavige did walk into the IRS headquarters building. It was not out of the blue one day.
Mm-hmm.
It was because of that Powell ruling. And in the Douglas Francis article, he said that Miscavige walked in there in late October 1991 into the IRS headquarters building for the meeting with Goldberg, and Powell v. U.S. came down the 22nd of October 1991. The dates match.
Mm-hmm.
And they struck, Miscavige and Goldberg struck an unholy deal. We will give you exemption in complete violation of the law, in complete violation of a Supreme Court ruling, in complete subverting the authority of the U.S. government. We'll do it. But you got to get all of your lawsuits dropped. But really, Garrison and Powell. And Miscavige said, you got a deal. And that's what happened. And that was it. The IRS diffused the bomb, right? I mean, think of the Hernandez case like a big giant bomb. And the Powell case and the Garrison case are the fuse slowly burning towards this bomb. And starting with Goldberg and finishing with Schoenfeld, they granted Scientology tax exemption. And when they did that, the IRS just went and extinguished that fuse, and the Hernandez bomb never went off. But to this day, Scientology enjoys tax exemption, not in compliance with the law, not in compliance with the Constitution. The IRS allows LDS Mormon tithing to be deducted, not lawfully. Jewish temple dues to be deducted, not lawfully. Catholic mass stipends to be deducted, not lawfully. And to this day, a United States Supreme Court ruling is out the window and not being honored by the IRS. And the worst part about it is that by forgiving Scientology its tax billion-dollar bill, that enabled Scientology to continue to exist. And Scientology is a dangerous, abusive organization. People have gotten hurt. Physical abuse, false imprisonment. I'm going to read it here in a minute, okay? And if the IRS had just done its job in 1989 and honored a Supreme Court ruling, which they are obligated to do, if they had enforced that bill on Scientology as the law required them to do, Scientology would have gone defunct. It would have been gone. They owed $1 billion. They had $250 million. It's over. And all of that abuse would not have taken place. Now, there are two things I would like to read to you, which I think are so egregious that I actually want to read them out loud, and then I'll read them again when I go through my sources. So the first is this is entitled Church of Scientology of California v. Commissioner. The date is 1984, and they don't give a specific date. And I'll just read this to you. It's docket number 3352-78. All right? And I'm going to flip now to page 10 of 54. And remember, this is dated 1984. I'm going to read it. Respondent's trial memorandum filed October 3rd, 1980, cataloged a series of petitioners' acts, policies, and procedures which respondent intended to prove to show petitioner's failure to comply with the public policy. These acts, policies, and procedures include 1. Conspiracy to impede and obstruct the Internal Revenue Service under 18 U.S. Code Section 371. 2. Abuse of the role of religious confidant by auditors. 3. The infliction of psychic or psychiatric harm, including the loss of moral judgment through brainwashing accomplished by auditing and other practices and procedures. 4. The use of blackmail and intimidation to implement petitioner's fair game policy. 5. The involuntary dissolution of marriages and family ties through the enforcement of the petitioner's disconnect policy. 6. Involuntary detention and false imprisonment. 7. The making of false statements to immigration authorities in violation of 18 U.S. Code Section 1544. 8. The removal of large amounts of currency from the United States without disclosure. 9. The false registration of petitioner's fleet of private yachts used for pleasure when in fact they were used for paramilitary training and commercial activities. And 10. The drastic punishment of staff and members.
What is the source of that again?
This is a lawsuit entitled Church of Scientology of California v. Commissioner. It is dated 1984. The docket number is 3352-78. This memo comes from a lawsuit from 1984. And what this proves, this was an IRS memo that they wrote, and they were talking about Scientology, right? And they were talking about, everything from brainwashing to false imprisonment. And this was written, the memo was written in 1980, and it was attached to a 1984 lawsuit. Now, what does this prove? It proves that the IRS knew Scientology was dangerous and harmful well before they granted them tax exemption ultimately on October 1st, 1993, which enabled Scientology to continue to exist. Which means this proves that the IRS knew that not only were they breaking the Constitution and the law, but they were enabling a dangerous organization to continue abusing people. They knew that Scientology was dangerous.
So I have two questions. One is, I'm surprised that the IRS would even weigh in on the practices of a church and judge it. And then two, by pointing that out, were they hoping to galvanize some other organization to go after the Church of Scientology?
No.
What is the point of giving that 10 bullet point list?
Okay. Well, the point, okay. This is 1984. When was the Hernandez ruling? June 5th, 1989. This was when this lawsuit is one of those 2,400 lawsuits where Scientology was trying to get tax exemption, okay? And the IRS they were fighting Scientology. Remember, they were fighting them up until the Hernandez ruling. They didn't care about Scientology. They weren't afraid of them. They said, you're a commercial enterprise and you owe taxes.
Yeah.
And so this is one of those lawsuits out of 2,400 lawsuits. The IRS went to court over this and won. Okay, they won this. And this is just part of the lawsuit where the IRS submitted a memo to the court saying, these are some of why we think that Scientology does not deserve tax exemption. Now, this is not a comment on Scientology's religious beliefs at all. This is a comment on abuse. These are not religious
practices,
sermons,
not beliefs,
or these are not rituals or what have you. These are just what they do. False imprisonment, physical abuse, psychological damage.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, this was the go-go. Would you say that the 80s were the heyday for the Church of Scientology?
Their highest, the highest number of adherents that they ever had was about 100,000, and it was in the mid to late 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When Tom Cruise was Top Gunning his way through it.
Yeah, I think that movie Top Gun came out in 1986, but I
Mm.
don't know when he joined officially.
So here's my question.
Mhm.
If they've not been paying taxes since 1991?
1990s. Well, they haven't really. Actually, they have not been paying taxes really ever. I mean, I think they got tax exemption in 1957. They got it, I think, in 57.
Uh,
Not sure about that date. They lost it in 67.
mm-hmm. They still didn't pay though, right?
Yeah. And they have not, actually, you're right. I didn't even think of that. They've never paid taxes since 57.
So they racked up $1 billion in taxes through 1991, right?
Yeah.
That was their back tax bill. So since then, which is 33 years later, how much money do you think they've been pocketing now?
Well, yeah.
I mean, is that
How
something?
much are they worth?
Yeah.
That's kind of an open question.
Mhm.
And according to the internet, it's anywhere from $3 to $5 billion that they have. But I also believe that number is highly suspect for two reasons. Number one, religions have much more relaxed reporting requirements on their income and their net worth. Okay.
Sure.
Number one. Number two, if you watch Alex Gibney's documentary, there is something that is said in here that I believe is not exactly another thing that's not exactly accurate. He says that churches are not allowed to hoard their money.
Mm.
But I Googled, are churches allowed to invest their money in mutual funds? And I found several articles that said, yes, you can put your money into mutual funds. All of the experts in Scientology will tell you that Scientology is not allowed to invest its money.
Mhm.
And then they'll tell you that it's worth between $3 and $5 billion. So I don't know how accurate that number is. And to be fair, all of the experts in Scientology will say that no one really knows how much money they have. It's a very rough estimate as to how much they have.
Do you know anything about whether they're investing in new real estate, building new locations, or are they rolling? Are they closing them down and rolling them back? Like, are they still in Florida? Do they still have all those yachts?
Yeah.
What's going on with the?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that was brought up in the Alex Gibney documentary. That churches, according to the documentary, are not allowed to hoard their money. I don't know if anyway. According to the documentary, they're not allowed to hoard their money. So what Scientology does is it takes the money that it takes in from courses, from auditing, from donations, from its members, and then purchases real estate and calls those building orgs. They don't call their buildings churches, they call them orgs. And they will purchase a building in an up and coming area. They'll put money into it, they'll fix it up, and then they sit on it. And then, of course, over time, the value of that property goes up. But because they are a tax-exempt organization, they don't have to pay tax on it. And, if you watch a lot of these podcasts, there are several podcasts on YouTube. They call themselves SPTV.
Mm-hmm.
They all publish under all of these like former Scientologists, and there are a bunch of Scientology activists.
You mean SP like subversive person? Is that what it's?
Suppressive
person.
Yeah. Yep. That's why they call it that. Suppressive person, SPTV. They'll say on these podcasts that these buildings are empty, that there's no one there. There's no one taking courses. There's no one joining Scientology anymore. But that's not the real purpose of these buildings.
Mm.
The real purpose is so that Scientology can sit on its money. This article, I've mentioned it earlier. It's by Kent Royalty and Diana Ross. It is 80%. They're full of great information. I would say it's about 80% of the salient information in here. There's no mention of the Garrison case, but they talk about the Powell case. They got it. They figured out what really motivated the IRS.
And where was that published? This
was originally published in the ATA Journal of Legal Tax Research in 2005, which is odd because there's no date on this. But if you anyway. And it's going to be on my website, and I'll talk about it where exactly. All right. Now, so this article is entitled, "Can Other Religions Boldly Go Where Only Scientology Has Gone Before?" Okay.
That's clever.
It's written by Kent Royalty and Diana Ross of St. Mary's University, the one in Texas. I am now going to turn to page 10 of 22 pages. And I'm just going to read this. Surprisingly, the saga was about to take an unexpected turn. Not only did the IRS not attempt to extend the Hernandez decision to other religions, it confused matters by, in effect, overturning the Supreme Court Hernandez decision in 1993 with Revenue Ruling 9373. So I've been saying that the Supreme Court has directly violated the Hernandez ruling, okay? And according to Kent Royalty and Diana Ross, the way that the IRS has violated the Supreme Court ruling is with Revenue Ruling 9373.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ask me for a solid piece of information, a solid piece of evidence, show me how the IRS has violated a Supreme Court ruling, the piece of evidence is Revenue Ruling 9373. Now, this is a screen capture of the IRS's exempt organization Revenue Ruling webpage. You see that at the top?
Mm-hmm.
So we are now going to look at Revenue Ruling 9373 and read it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm going to do now is flip to the next page. And here is 1993, and I click the drop down, and just do me a favor and read to me Revenue Ruling 9373.
None available during this period?
None available during this period, okay? And to me, that's pretty bad, okay? Because the piece of incriminating evidence of how did the IRS violate the Supreme Court ruling, it's not on the IRS's website. It's not on the web page where it's supposed to be. And I can show you, I searched all of the IRS's website, and if you type in 93-73, nothing comes up.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what Kent Royalty and Diana Ross identified as a piece of proof of criminal act by the IRS, Revenue Ruling 9373, it's not on the IRS's entire website, nor on the web page where it's supposed to be. That's bad.
Why'd they hide it?
Well, yeah. You see,
How'd they hide it?
Yeah. Why is it not where it's supposed to be? The most sinister answer is that the IRS is hiding it. That they know that Revenue Ruling 9373 is a criminal act, and they're hiding it. Cover up.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most sinister way of looking at all of this.
Mm-hmm.
The most benign way to look at this is say that whoever at the IRS is responsible for maintaining this web page just flubbed their job and happened to forget to put a revenue ruling on the web page.
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, I would say that there's it's a bit more problematic than that.
Mm.
So if you want to find Revenue Ruling 9373, there are a few websites that has it. Tax Notes, which is obviously a civilian website. Another one called charitableplanning.com, and then one called Uncle Fed's Tax Board. And I'm just going to read to you what Revenue Ruling 9373 states. Okay. Revenue Ruling 9373 states, Revenue Ruling 78-189 is obsoleted. That's it. Revenue Ruling 78-189 is obsoleted. It's 5 words long. Revenue Ruling 9373 is. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So you can find Revenue Ruling 9373 on 3 civilian websites that I was able to find. And now I'm just going to quickly go to the exempt organization Revenue Rulings webpage for the IRS that has the revenue rulings from 1978. So I'm just going to quickly read Revenue Ruling 78-189 because that's what 9373 obsoletes. So Revenue Ruling 78-189. A fixed donation paid to the Church of Scientology for general education courses, religious education courses, and auditing and processing courses that does not exceed the fair market value of these courses is not a charitable contribution within the meaning of Code section 170. So that's revenue ruling 78-189, and it is on their webpage.
But it does matter because you're telling me that 778-189 was the Hernandez rule, which is that it's not a charitable donation.
No, you're right. You're right. They were, but remember, Hernandez was in 89. This was in 1978. But
Sorry, but it's still the
yeah,
same
what they were
theme.
saying is that these are quid pro quo payments. You're right.
Yeah.
These are payment for services. They're not tax deductible.
Yeah.
They're not donations. These are payment for services. That's what 78-189 states. And the IRS was right with revenue ruling 78-189. And even though revenue ruling 78-189 is not in the Hernandez case, you're right. That's exactly what the Supreme Court concluded as well. They both reached, okay.
Yeah.
But then the IRS obsoleted 78-189 with 93-73. So with 93-73, the IRS contradicted itself and it contradicted the Supreme Court. And revenue ruling 93-73 is not on the IRS's web page where it's supposed to be, nor is it anywhere else on its website. And that's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is something that I wanted to bring particular attention to you, and I will tomorrow in the presentation of the evidence. But I wanted to bring that to your attention. And then finally, the last thing I want to say is this, which is also on my website. In 2015, there was a comedian named John Oliver. Are you familiar with him?
Yes.
He's got a show on.
I know who he is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, John Oliver, kind of as a gag, he actually was able to get his comedy television show declared a tax-exempt religion. Yeah. For 3 weeks, he called it Our Lady of Perpetual Exemption. And if you go on YouTube, and the links will be on my website, but the television comedy show where he ran this gag is viewable on YouTube. And he just makes fun of how easy it is to get religious tax exemption. But here's the thing. While he did this for comedy, in fact, the man has a valid point. And what I'm getting at is that if you think Scientology receiving religious tax exemption is preposterous and absurd, I'm saying Scientology and their exemption very well is only the tip of the iceberg. Because I went to the IRS's website, there are 1.8 million tax-exempt organizations in the United States, okay? And as sure as I'm sitting here, several of them really don't deserve tax exemption per the law. But because the IRS gives out religious tax exemption, it would appear almost like candy at Halloween. You know, whoever shows up and says, "Can I have some?" Sure. Some for you, some for you, some for you. As sure as I'm sitting here, there are religions and also probably very likely secular tax-exempt organizations who have gotten exemption not in compliance with the law. And what that, of course, would mean is that the federal government and the 50 state governments have not been collecting lawfully owed taxes that's owed to them because the IRS has not been enforcing the law properly. So while Scientology is completely egregious, I think they're only the tip of the iceberg. I really do. I think that this problem, this issue of organizations receiving tax exemption, especially religious tax exemption, not in compliance with the law, I think this is way deeper and way more severe than people realize.
So I have a question. What is it you really hope to gain from this passion project that you've been pursuing for the last almost 3 years?
Yeah.
What's in it for you?
Well, look, that's a really good question. And I'll say this. Number one, most important of all, like I said earlier, human suffering goes at the top of the list. Okay. And I want every last person who has been harmed by the Scientology group to get their truth, to get their justice. I want them to know. I want them to know what really happened to them. Okay. I want them to know that why the IRS granted Scientology tax exemption. It really pains me when I hear them constantly repeating this false narrative that Scientology harassed the IRS into compliance, because I know it's a lie. I know it's a Scientology lie. And I know that even though they've gotten out of Scientology, they're still being manipulated in one way
Hmm.
by this Scientology group. But I want them to get their truth. I want them to know that the IRS capitulated to Scientology because of the Hernandez case. I want them to know that yes, the IRS has violated a Supreme Court ruling. They have broken, and so the IRS has violated a Supreme Court ruling to their detriment. The IRS has violated the law to their detriment.
Hmm.
I want them to know what happened to them. That is my number one goal. Number two goal is I want the integrity of the Constitution to be maintained, and it unfortunately, it would appear to me that our Constitution is in need of some repair. Our legal code is in need of some repair. I want the integrity of our elected government to be maintained. I want the IRS to be held responsible for what they've done. I want Scientology to be held responsible. What I want is to see this Scientology group completely dismantled and relegated to the waste bin of history. That's what I want. Now, there is an activist out there by the name of Jeffrey Augustine, and you know, I got a hold of him. I emailed him a couple times. We spoke on the phone a couple times, and I said to him, Jeff, because at first I called him Mr. Augustine, and then he said, call me Jeff, and I said, call me Jason. We were on a first name basis for a short while. And I said to him, listen, I've done my own research. I don't think it's this harassment campaign that motivated the IRS. And Jeffrey Augustine, who lives in Los Angeles, he said to me, I couldn't agree more. He said, I've never, ever believed this plot that Scientology harassed the IRS into compliance. And look, and Lee, I'm serious. This was like maybe less than 4 months ago that I had a phone call with him, less than 3 months ago. I almost fell out of my chair because I said to myself, good God, have I found a kindred spirit here?
Hmm.
Because all of the rest of them, because I spoke with Lawrence Wright in person. I spoke with Lawrence Wright in person to his face, and I've emailed him a few times. I've emailed what's his name, Mike Rinder, several times, and I keep telling them you're wrong about this, and they keep dismissing me. And everybody thought I was nuts because I'm like the one guy telling everybody you're all wrong. But then in Jeffrey Augustine, I thought I had found a kindred spirit. And again, Jeffrey Augustine he's a very well known, very well respected anti-Scientologist activist. He has a website called the Scientology Money Project. It's a it's not so much a website, it's a database, and it's just chock full of just all kinds of information you could ever want
Hmm.
about Scientology. But anyway, I was speaking to him on the phone, and he said, I've never believed this false narrative, or I've never believed this narrative either. He said, no way did Scientology beat up the IRS. And I was talking with him and hoping that I might be able to go out to California and sit down with him almost exactly like this and explain my findings. Then in that discussion, I sent an email to Jeffrey Augustine where I said, listen, I just want to let you know up front that while I've been doing all of this and my priorities are justice for the victims and the integrity of the Constitution and the law, I said, I will politely ask for a 10% finder's fee if any lawsuits come from my work, which I thought was fair, because because as I see it, the victims of Scientology have a slam dunk lawsuit against the IRS, and they've got a lawsuit that's so strong that Scientology is going to be taken apart brick by brick.
Hmm.
And I don't know. And look, if history is a teacher,
Hmm.
nothing's going to come of this. The truth is going to stay buried. I'm going to publish this on YouTube. I'm going to publish my website. I'm going to email the links with a short description in the email, and nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to happen. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? But, if people are able to file lawsuits, which I want them to do, I want them to get compensated for the damage that's been done to their lives. Forget me for a minute. I want them to file these lawsuits. Like we saw in that documentary, that lady towards the end, well, I won't say her name. I don't want to bring her into this, but she was crying because the Church of Scientology told her daughter that the daughter and the granddaughter had to disconnect from the grandmother. This woman,
A woman who had been in the church through the toppermost ranks,
yeah,
the highest levels.
yeah. And
It's-
then they tossed her aside and ripped her family apart. Does she deserve to sue the IRS? Yeah. Does she deserve to sue Scientology to death, literally till it dies? Yeah. Do other people deserve to sue the IRS to the hilt? Yeah. Do I want them to? Yes. And if there's not one dime of financial benefit to me, fine. Fine. Their truth and justice is the most important thing. Second most important thing is the integrity of our government. But anyway, getting back to Jeffrey Augustine, I sent him in the email. I said, listen, I just want to let you know up front that I'm going to be asking for a 10% finder's fee. Well, that was the end of it. Jeffrey Augustine, and this is what really saddened me, I really think he misunderstood what I was saying. I think Jeffrey Augustine thought that I was making financial demands on him because I was talking about maybe coming out to Los Angeles and doing an interview with him. Anyway, and it all blew apart. Jeffrey Augustine responded. He was a very well-written email, very, very well written. But literally the bottom line, the last line was, do not ever contact me again. And as of right this moment, as of today's date, I am persona non grata to Jeffrey Augustine, which really does sadden me because, he's a really strong anti-Scientology critic, and he was the only person I found that was a kindred spirit. So he doesn't believe that it was the harassment campaign that motivated the IRS. The problem is he didn't know what did, and that's what I was going to try and explain to him. But I have a lot of respect for him, and I think our potential working together completely fell apart due to a complete misunderstanding. So what it is this: I am asking for a 10% finder's fee, which I think is fair. If people are able to file lawsuits based off of my work that they wouldn't have been able to file without me, I would ask for a 10% finder's fee. But am I demanding money from anybody? No. Am I expecting them to pay me? No. But I'll politely ask. It's up to them. It's their choice.
So I don't really understand how things work that way. So say I am that woman that we saw in the documentary who realizes that she could sue the IRS and the Church of Scientology, two separate cases. What would she claim? And how do you get to be an implicit part of that?
Well, I mean, I think that her lawsuit, let's just use the IRS as a good example. The IRS provably has violated the Constitution and violated the law. Okay, at her expense. Okay, now why do we have?
So she could sue damages.
Yeah,
Personal damages.
I mean, of course.
And there's so much
because
money.
her life has been damaged.
And there's so much money there.
Yeah, and we have the Constitution. Why do we have the Constitution? It's to keep people safe. Why do we have the law? To keep people safe. What did the IRS do? They broke the Constitution and they broke the law. What happened? People got hurt. It's that simple. And they broke the law on this lady, and they broke the law on remember the lady with the blue shirt? I'm trying not to use her name.
That's who I'm talking about, actually, the grandmother. Yeah.
No, the grandmother was the lady at the end. Remember the lady?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Whose daughter had fruit flies on her body?
Oh, my God.
Yeah. She can sue, has every right, and every moral right, and every legal right to sue.
Child endangerment.
Yeah.
Child endangerment.
Yeah, and her daughter has a case. Her daughter was being abused as a
child.
It was a 10-month-old. Yeah, it was horrible.
Aren't there a bunch of lawsuits chugging along somewhere towards the Church of Scientology by all their members who have been caught up in this toxicity?
These lawsuits, it's very, very difficult to sue a constitutionally protected entity.
Wow.
So anyway, the two ladies that we were talking about, one is at the very end of Alex Gibney's documentary. It's a lady, her last name is Goldberg, no relation to Fred Goldberg.
Right.
And, we were saying that the church told the daughter and the granddaughter to disconnect. Yeah, and then there's another lady named Spanky Taylor. Or Spanky's not even her first name; it's like a nickname.
It's a great nickname.
But she discovered that her daughter was being kept in a cadet org, which was supposed to be a nursery, but actually it was totally poorly run, and the daughter had fruit flies on her body and mucus in her eyes. And
it was like an Eastern Bloc orphanage.
Yeah.
It's disgusting.
Here's the thing. When I keep saying that Scientology's tax exemption is provably unconstitutional and provably unlawful, the reason why I'm saying that is because Scientology's tax exemption has already been ruled on in the Sklar v. Well, excuse me. It's been reviewed in the Sklar v. Commissioner case, which is another case, okay? This one, which is the final ruling, it's dated December 12th, 2008. I'm just going to quickly read this. What it was is Scientology's tax exemption was entered as evidence in the Sklar lawsuit, okay? But the judges couldn't rule on Scientology's tax exemption because that's not what was at issue. What was at issue was the Sklar's lawsuit. So what the judges could do and did do is they opined on Scientology's tax exemption, okay? Because they looked at the evidence and they got it. They understood what the Sklars were driving at, but they had a problem. They could only rule on the Sklars, not on Scientology. So I'm just going to read to you what the judges in the Sklar case opined.
Okay.
All right, you ready? Okay. The panel reasoned that the denominational preference embodied in the closing agreement, that's with the IRS Scientology closing agreement, embodied in the closing agreement was unconstitutional because it, quote, cannot be justified by a compelling government interest. Okay, these are federal judges saying Scientology's tax exemption, the closing agreement, is unconstitutional. Now, additionally, they opined, we would hold that the unlawful policy set forth in the closing agreement must be extended to all religious organizations. So again, they're calling, all right, I'm sorry, let me read that again. We would not hold that the unlawful policy set forth in the closing agreement must be extended to all religious organizations. So there you go. You have judges saying that Scientology's tax exemption is both unconstitutional and unlawful. So that's how I know that their exemption is unlawful and unconstitutional. Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add about the Sklar case, is that the federal judges have already opined that Scientology's tax exemption is unconstitutional and unlawful. And I just wanted to quickly clarify that the Sklar case, not in Alex Gibney's documentary, it's the Sklar case is not in Lawrence Wright's book, so he doesn't know, and therefore his readers don't know, that Scientology's tax exemption has already been reviewed by federal judges that concluded it's unconstitutional and unlawful. Sklar case, not in Mike Rinder's book, but the Sklar case it's mentioned in Janet Reitman's book, but quite frankly, I think she mentions it, I'm sorry to say, inadequately. And I'm just going to quickly read what Janet Reitman wrote. So this is entitled Inside Scientology, the Story of America's Most Secretive Religion. Janet Reitman, page 170, blah, 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 blah. In 1994, 1 year after Scientology's tax exemption was announced, an Orthodox Jewish couple from Los Angeles, Michael and Marla Sklar, tested the fairness of this agreement by suing the IRS for the right to deduct their children's religious education from their taxes, just as Scientologists were allowed to deduct the price of auditing. The Sklars lost and appealed and ultimately took their case to the Supreme Court. In October of 2009, the justices refused to hear the case without comment. So that is all Janet Reitman has to say about the Sklar case.
And what is she missing?
Well, what she's missing is that the judges in the Sklar case opined that Scientology's tax exemption is unconstitutional and unlawful. She missed the most important part of the Sklar case. I think what happened was, I don't know, but I think Janet Reitman only read about the Sklar case. I don't think she pulled
Mm.
and read the whole thing herself. And just for what it's worth, when I was in the government doing all source analysis, they would give us training, and there's this thing called reporting on reporting, which is where you repeat what other experts say and then put it together. And reporting on reporting is a big no-no in the government. You do not ever repeat what anyone says on a topic, okay? Instead, they teach us, it's called trust but verify. You listen to what an expert has to say. You listen to their arguments, you look at their sources, and you can keep them in mind, but then you fact check absolutely everything that they say, and then you look for anything that might contradict what they're saying, contradict their sources. So yeah, and when it comes to the topic of Scientology, when it comes to the mainstream literature, when it comes to all the people that I mentioned, especially the journalists, I think that there has been a lot of reporting on reporting. I think that that's how the truth got buried.
First of all, thank you for teaching me this incredible truth.
Do you find it interesting? Did it make sense?
It's fascinating, and I want to tell you why. Because sometimes when you're really close to stuff, you know, you can forget to say like the 5 key words that matter. So I'm just putting these out there, and you can use them yourself or don't bother. You can just get rid of this question altogether. But I will say this. What struck me is that your mission has been to give people the tools to fight for justice, that within this video and in all of your material online and your everywhere else that I'm sure it will be planted are the tools for individuals who are maligned and hurt by the Church of Scientology to get their justice, to be remunerated.
Okay.
I mean, it's a gift. So, wow. That's what I have to say. That's my judgment on all this. The second thing is a question. You may want to cut it, but I'm just curious, more from an intellectual perspective.
Go ahead. Earlier
on, you said, I'm not anti-religion. I believe it's the tenet of, our democracy that we should be able to pursue Judaism and Christianity and
Shintoism, Buddhism.
Whatever you want.
Yeah.
Scientology. I'm not here to, but the truth is you do hate this church. You do think it's an evil organization that needs to be dismantled. So I just think there's a contradiction there that you probably should explain.
Okay. The explanation is this. Okay, there's religion and there's belief, and you can believe anything you want. You can practice any way you want. If you want to talk about what Scientology teaches, we can. So it's not the practice of any religion that I have a problem with. It's the fact that this organization is abusive. Now, if Scientology operated in compliance with the law, whether it's how they garner or gain or how they get money through like most religions get money in just straight donation, they're called unrequited gifts. If they operated within the laws regarding finance, if they operated within the laws in like how you treat people, like false imprisonment doesn't happen, physical abuse doesn't, fine. They can study the teachings of L. Ron Hubbard. They can believe that L. Ron Hubbard is some sort of enlightened person.
Yeah.
They can do the auditing and hold these cans. I don't have a problem with any of that. I just have a problem with people being harmed. That's my objection. That's my objection.
Okay, I think that's a fair objection.
But in all of the schmutz that I've been regurgitating here, do you have any questions? Like,
yes, I have a question.
Go ahead. And I mean, like, because it wouldn't surprise me if you don't have questions. You want to know more about Fred Goldberg. You want to know more about the falsehood. You want to know more about mainstream literature. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I don't. I think you've been very clear. In fact, you've doubled back on and explained in greater detail every single important decision that was made legally that set the Church of Scientology up to be its, juggernaut of tax-free living that it is today. But my question is, it's been a while since Scientology is like Leah Remini. Is that her name? Leah.
Yeah, there's
I
Leah
mean,
Remini.
it's been like 9 years since there was anything legal. You said the last thing you mentioned was 2015 with maybe it's 2015. Why the silence around the Church of Scientology lately? And
Well, I
what?
don't think there's silence at all. Couple timelines of some stuff. The Lawrence Wright's book, which was very, very popular, 2013. Alex Gibney's documentary, 2015.
That's what I meant.
Leah Remini and Mike Rinder, who are very good friends, did a TV show called Scientology in the Aftermath. It ran from 2016 to 2019.
Mm,
And they did see again, it's another reason why I really, really admire Mike Rinder and Leah Remini. And I'm not criticizing these activists in
mm,
any way. I'm not.
mm,
I'm just saying that they're getting this wrong.
mhm.
And that's not a criticism.
Yeah, well, you're allowed to right or wrong.
Anyhow, well, okay, but anyway, Leah Remini and Mike Rinder did this A&E television show from 2016 to 2019, and what they did is they went around and they interviewed all of the people
Mm,
that have been harmed by this group, right? Getting their stories told, trying to get the word out, trying to expose Scientology.
mhm,
And this is one of the things that really
mm,
breaks my heart
mm,
is that I'm watching this TV show that's been off the air since 2019. I've been watching Leah Remini and Mike Rinder, and they're trying to expose the truth. And Lee, the IRS already knew.
mhm.
They just didn't care.
Yeah.
They left these people behind.
Mhm.
They threw them to the wolves. Um, and Leah Remini and Mike Rinder are spinning their wheels with this show,
Mm,
trying to get people the truth. They already knew the truth. The right people knew the truth.
mhm,
The IRS. They just didn't give it to. They just didn't care.
mm,
They just didn't care. So yeah, that's one of the things that energizes me. But
mhm,
you were saying so much silence. There's not silence. After 2019, there have been all of these SPTV
mm,
podcasts
mhm,
on YouTube. Mike Rinder has one. Leah Remini contributes often enough.
mhm.
There's a woman named Amy Scobie who was an executive with Scientology for years and years, including in the 80s. There's Mark and Claire Headley, who I've watched, and I send them super chats like when someone's live, if you're not aware, if they're doing a
Yeah.
podcast live, you
Yeah,
can
you can
chat
chat
with
with
them,
them. Yeah.
but you can also pay to have like one of your messages highlighted. So okay, so that they see it, so that they respond. So I've super chatted with Mark and Claire Headley.
Mhm.
I've chatted with Jeffrey Augustine, who right now I'm on his I'm on his
Do not contact
yeah,
list.
I'm on his do not contact list on persona non grata. Damn shame. I really, really hope that he and I can talk it out and
Well,
smooth out
things
some
may change.
misunderstandings.
Yeah, things may
I
change.
really do,
Mm,
because I have a lot of respect
mhm,
for him. His
mhm,
dedication is
mhm.
impressive.
Wow,
But so no, it's not silence. It's gone online.
it's changing.
Yeah, and the thing is though is that actually most people get their information obviously now from the internet. It's where I
Mhm,
got all this.
mhm,
So I think that a lot of people, I doubt anyone is ever seriously considering joining Science. I don't know how many people join every year, but I think it's probably less than 10, because they're going online and they're looking up Scientology and they're discovering that this is a very malicious group. So where is Scientology getting its new members? It's from within. People are being born into it.
And what about the high profile members like, Tom Cruise, of course, maybe John Travolta? Are they distancing themselves, do you think, from the church these days? I don't see their names stuck with that word Scientology all that often anymore.
I don't think
And is Muscave, is that his name? Muscovy? Is he still in charge?
Miscavige.
Miscavige, is he still in charge?
Miscavige, I'll put it to you this way. Mike Rinder, since leaving the church in 2007, has no respect for David Miscavige
Mhm,
whatsoever.
mhm,
As far as Mike Rinder is concerned, David Miscavige is something to be scraped off of his shoe.
mhm.
Um, Mike Rinder calls him Mr. Mickey-witz. Um, Mike Rinder said that he read a book once called The Sociopath Next Door, written by some Harvard professor. Um, and he said that he read the book, and he said and as Mike Rinder was reading the book, he asked, it was a woman. Has she met David Miscavige?
Mhm.
Apparently, the guy's a complete narcissist. He's a sociopath.
The dark triangle.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a really really dangerous man. He's physically violent, among other things,
Mhm.
which we saw in the documentary. Miscavige physically assaults people. He's verbally abusive. He's an all around. Well, his father, for God's sakes, Ron Miscavige.
Mhm.
Ron Miscavige wrote a book about their time together. Ron Miscavige was in Scientology until he
Mhm.
escaped,
Mhm.
and Ron Miscavige wrote a book, and the book is entitled, I believe it's "Ruthless Scientology: My Son David Miscavige and Me."
Mhm.
Okay, okay.
Mhm.
So if your father writes a book about your time together,
Mhm.
and the first word of the title of the book is ruthless, yeah, you're pretty much an SOB.
Mhm. So
So
anyway,
is he going to leave power? No. Under no circumstances is David Miscavige going to leave power. This guy's a narcissist who wants to be Mr. Head Honcho, and the idea he would never say to himself, maybe I should step down and let a new generation take over for the good of the organization. Apparently, he would never say that, according to everyone. Because yeah,
it's almost impossible for me to believe he goes unchallenged, especially if membership is going down. I can't believe things are always going to stay the same under those conditions. So, but I asked you about celebrities. So, what do you think? Like, do you think some of these, like Tom Cruise, is distancing himself? Is that a
no,
sign that the
no.
Scientology thing
I,
doesn't have as much of a hold?
I read somewhere that Tom Cruise had just purchased some very expensive real estate condo in Clearwater, Florida.
Oh, I read that too.
Yeah,
Oh, so he's just on the down low about it.
he is. And I think what's happening is um they're not plugging Scientology anymore because they kind of know that it makes them look foolish.
Yeah.
But as we learned from the documentary, which is true, Scientology, it lures people in. It says, we're here to help you. We're here to help you grow as a person,
Hmm.
but you need to be completely honest with us. And you spill your guts, because if you remember, I read in the 1980 memo, in the 1984 lawsuit, um, it was abuse of the role of religious confidant by auditors. So the IRS knew that too. That you sit there and spill your guts to a religious confidant, thinking it's protected. It's not protected, because they're going to then turn and use that information against you. So who knows what all Tom Cruise has admitted about himself to Scientology, or John Travolta, or all of those other
I can
people.
imagine a lot, and I
Yeah,
can imagine that they want to keep a gag on that, so
I don't know.
they're gonna stay in line. I have one final question,
Sure.
and that is for you to tell me and everyone else what we can do next with this information, or where we should look for more. Like just a recap of where we find
Well,
everything you've talked about, and
probably the best place to go for a recap of everything is going to be my website, jasonpolycron.com. I have all 47 of my sources posted there. And in another video, I'm going to go through every single source and what it proves and why it's significant. So that the idea being is that the audience at home can watch that video and listen to why I think it's important,
Mhm.
pause, go to the website, bring up the source, read it for yourself, and you'll see that source proves what I
are
suggest.
they going to be able to kind of contact you through a, not phone, not telephone or cell phone, but are they going to be able to
No.
no contact? No, don't contact me.
No.
But what if they are Scientologists who left the church and want to pursue a lawsuit? How do
Well,
they?
look, the goal of all of this, the video and the website, is that I'm going to put it all together in an email, and I'm going to send it to some of the usual suspects. I'm going to definitely send it to Mike Rinder. I think he's number 3 on my list,
Hmm.
behind my 2 family members.
Hmm.
So I'm going to send it to Mike Rinder. I'm going to send it to, there's a man named Mark Bunker, who's is aware of the Scientology, and what a problem it is.
Hmm.
There's a journalist named Tony Ortega. I've got Lawrence Wright's email. I've got Janet Reitman's email. So the whole goal of this is to explode the information out, and to get it out. And once it's out, it's out. Once it's out, I'm done. My role is over. And what I'm really hoping to do, what I really, 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 really want to do is to see Mike Rinder and Mark and Claire Headley and some others are a part of an organization called the Aftermath Foundation, and they help people that who have left Scientology to get back on their feet, to get them a job, to get them what they need. And the Aftermath Foundation is who I would love to work with.
Yes, I love that.
But you see, the way I see it is that this is like the first part of the race, you know?
Yeah.
And the second part of the race, first part of the race is exposing the truth. What really did happen? What did motivate the IRS? Okay. So that they'll be in a position to take and do something about it and affect positive change.
Yeah.
Right. So that's stage one. Stage two is hiring the lawyers. It's talking with the victims of Scientology. You know, it's literally the aftermath of the whole thing. And what I want and hoping is to pass the baton to Mike Rinder, number one person. Close second would be, well, put it to you, Mike Rinder's number one and tied for second would be Leah Remini, Mark and Claire Headley, Tom DeVocht, Amy Scobie, a man named Jefferson Hawkins, but of course, Jeffrey Augustine, can't forget him. All of them are tied for second. And I would love for them to really listen to this and to realize what happened and to realize that they've got now what I believe and what I truly, truly hope are the tools and the knowledge and the information and the evidence that they need to now go after this Scientology group and destroy it and just dance on its grave and then sue the IRS and expose the IRS and condemn the IRS. And so yeah, what I'm trying to do with this is it's like I've dug up the baton, I've run half the race, and I want to give the baton to those people I just mentioned to run it, to get it across the finish line, which is Scientology burning to the ground and the IRS being taken out to the woodshed by the United States government. And let me just say one more thing. Why did the IRS do all of this? It doesn't make sense. You know, when the Hernandez ruling came down and the IRS realized that there was going to be this huge impact to the area of charitable giving, why didn't the IRS go to the Department of Treasury and say, listen, this ruling came down, we're going to have to adhere to it, it's going to cause a lot of discontent among a lot of people, but we want to let you know this is coming. And presumably the Department of Treasury would have said to the IRS, okay, the Secretary of Treasury would have said, okay, Commissioner Goldberg, thank you for telling me, I've got it from here. The Secretary of Treasury would then go to the elected government and explain the same thing. Like, oh yeah, this is coming unless you, the elected government, does something. Okay, there are going to be a lot of upset people. So the elected government says to Treasury, okay, thank you, we've got it from here. There would have been some tweaks made to the tax code. People would have gotten what they wanted. Life would have moved on, and that is it. That is it. Because one of the things that the governments do, both the federal and the state government, is they smooth out wrinkles in the law. These wrinkles do happen. Laws conflict with each other, blah, blah, blah. They need to be smoothed out. And that's all that ever needed to happen, was for the IRS to just do its job. Just do your job.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
Respect the law, respect your oath of office, respect the elected government, and just let the system work itself out. And yet, for some bizarre reason, the IRS decided that the best way to handle the situation was to violate the Constitution, violate the law, enable a dangerous organization to continue abusing people, and sweep it all under the rug. And since 1989 to 93, so about 30 years, they've been actually getting away with this jazz. That's another thing that's truly bizarre. Just do your job, and the system would have worked itself out. The Constitution would have been fortified. It would have been enforced, and therefore a dangerous group would have been gotten rid of, because the law would have also gotten rid of Scientology. I just don't know why they chose to go this route. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't. All they had to do was their job.
I mean, I would be intimidated by every single nonprofit religious organization filing lawsuits throughout the land, you know? That sounds like a lot of headaches.
Yeah, but the IRS was fighting those lawsuits and winning. So, Lee,
Mhm.
this now brings us to the end of my presentation of the conversational part of
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
And so I just so want to thank you for being here, for listening to me. I know that this sounded pretty bizarre, being my sounding board. I really hope that this and you and I
Mhm.
are able to affect positive change. And who knows, who knows? But a lot of people really got hurt, so I think we're doing something important here for sure.
I just want to thank you for just in an inconceivable amount of work that you've done. I mean, we're talking 2.5 years of volunteerism. You've been studying, you've been chasing, you've been interviewing, you've been popping up on people's lawns. I mean, this is a
Really have.
person who has fought to get to the bottom line on this story, all the while because you've kept in your heart the suffering that has come about because of these, you know, these uh, crimes against people. Um, and I sometimes forget that our government actually can work for us, you know?
Yeah.
You've reminded me that the government can be held responsible, and it can be held responsible by one caring citizen willing to do the work, willing to fight.